We are. Welcome to this special session on writing for the NACADA Journal. Since this is an on-demand session, I don't know whether to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, since you can watch this at any time after this presentation has completed. So we'll get started. The four of us will be the panelists and commenters for this session. I'll let each one introduce themselves as they talk about the strategies that they have used as writers, and then we will all talk about our strategies as editors at the end. We are looking at a 5-stage process for this presentation as to how we think people should be looking at and considering the way they're getting articles or thinking about writing an article for the journal or other publications. But what we're going to share with you is how we chose one of our own articles and are going to elaborate on how we went through this 5-step process to end up with a publication. So two more steps. There we go. How did we get organized, and ultimately and finally the preparation in the appropriate APA style, which is the style that we use for the NACADA Journal and the NACADA Review. So I'll get started with the ideas that you might come up with as readers of the literature, of contributors to the field, working every day, wanting to write, maybe have written, whatever. But these are the kinds of places that ideas can come from. And you'll hear a couple of these specified from the four of us as we go through the presentation. Many of those occur in group settings that you see, things like social media discussions or sitting next to somebody at a conference program, meetings that you have on campus, whether it be policy meetings or programmatic meetings or whatever it might happen to be. There may be ideas that get generated there that could evolve into a journal article of some kind. So we're going to look at a couple of these ideas and these places from which ideas come as we move through. So I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to use the last bullet point, a degree requirement. In my doctoral program, where did the idea come from? If you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner is where we're each going to talk about how we got the idea to write something, prepare a manuscript. And for me, it was a degree requirement. When I was doing my PhD, we had to prepare something from our dissertations that resembled manuscript format. So we didn't have to submit it. It never had to get published or anything, but we had to at least be in that mode of thinking. So I chose the article that's cited at the bottom, which is a distillation of my dissertation. And at the time, the idea for the dissertation was that I always saw faculty members as being both academic advisors and classroom teachers. And how did they perceive themselves and how did students perceive themselves? And if you will note that this article appeared in the very first edition of the NACADA Journal, and I purposely saved it for that. It was at a time when I was convinced that the association was going to form, was going to develop. So again, that's why I knew early on that I wanted to submit this manuscript for the NACADA Journal. Constructing an argument, this is going to differ for other people. It was a requirement, so I had no choice. I had to distill, and I went back and looked today. If I look at my notes from that, I reduced my 180-page dissertation with 200 references down to 5 pages and 8 references. So that's what it took to get that done. relevance of the topic. You know, how does it fit into what's going on now? I just submitted a program to another conference about the aftermath of COVID-19. So being current is certainly appropriate, but going into the history and development of why you're at the point you are now needs to be taken into consideration. For me, it was the standard dissertation format that we all use and students that we advise and sit on dissertation committees still use. A big part is the feedback. I got no feedback. Well, I did from my advisor, but my committee and so forth didn't give me a whole lot of feedback until I did my orals. But I did get feedback through the process. So when it came time for the manuscript to be submitted, it was pretty thorough and pretty well reviewed. That's not going to happen for everybody, but that's one example now of how I have come to appreciate the writing. And this was not my first publication, but the process worked for me by doing the dissertation and extracting from that. So I'll turn it over to Lisa, who's going to share with us her experience.
Hi, everyone. Now, Tom's a pretty tough act to follow, but I'm excited to talk to you about another way that I was able to publish a manuscript that came from a class paper. So the class paper is something that I worked on maybe in the early 2010s when I was in my PhD program, and it was a contemporary sociological theory class. And in that course, I wrote about a specific theory, which was symbolic interactionism. And I was looking at athlete subculture, something that had been on my mind as someone who worked as an athletic advisor. And I decided many, many years later when I came to Kansas State to be a faculty member that maybe I should do something with this. And I added a co-author who was a full-time advisor at K-State and actually ended up being a doctoral advisee of mine. And we worked together on this study. No literature had been really published about this since the late 1980s, early 90s. And so we thought, hey, we got to see if anything has changed. A lot of the literature had focused on gender differences and reactions to how athletes work or focus on academics or make athletics a priority. Of course, I started with this class paper and researched a lot about theory, added more descriptive information about our methodology, which was using focus groups, which was quite different from some of the other articles. And then we analyzed our results through components of the theory of symbolic interactionism. So when we got our feedback from this journal, the journal was a sociology-based journal, and we use a sociological theory. So I thought that would be a pretty good match. But they actually asked us, the reviewers and editors, to add a second theory to our paper on neoliberalism. And first, we were pretty reluctant to add another theory, trying to figure out where it fit in. But looking back at this paper, which has been published for about 3 years, we see that this theory is very relevant given the changes that have been coming, even pre-pandemic, talking about athletes potentially earning name, image, and likeness rights, being able to make some money in this kind of commercial space of college athletics, which we found to be really relevant to that theory. So this was a really rewarding experience, and you never know, a class paper might turn into a publication. I'm going to pass it now to Dr. McGill.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. I'm an assistant professor at Kansas State University, but I was an academic advisor for about 10 years in a primary role. And my example comes from my dissertation data set, but the article actually isn't part of my dissertation. And so what happened was I was reading a methodological paper about the differences between phenomenology and phenomenography, and I just had sort of a eureka moment about how I could re-examine my data set using this new methodology that I learned about. And so that's what I did. And this also illustrates a point that you can get more than one paper out of one data set if you think kind of creatively about it. In terms of constructing the argument, scholars are divided in terms of whether or not advising is a profession, and this can be kind of controversial. But the relevance to the audience is that through the professionalization process, we gain influence and autonomy over our work. It helps us to vie for resources against competing areas. and it improves our reputation and increases public understanding, which signals the public valuing the work that we do. In terms of the organization of the article, even though this was a piece off of my dissertation, I actually had 2 research questions and 2 sets of findings. And when I took this article to my dissertation chair, when she was reading the introduction, she was going nuts because apparently I was kind of meandering between these 2 different things. And it took kind of meeting with her for me to realize that I had 2 papers there. The separate research questions and the separate finding sections were indicating that there was 2 papers. So actually, once I refocused my energy on the one that ultimately became published, it was super smooth sailing after that, which was really important. The feedback that I received was really helpful. One of the reviewers I could tell was really enthusiastic about the paper, but also really challenged me to think more deeply about some of the things I was asserting. And it was really helpful to kind of be challenged in a way that was also like, I really love this, but how do you respond to this sort of thing? The second reviewer was not as enthused, and I unfortunately couldn't get a sense of the comments. There were several comments about going deeper and probing more deeply, but I was having some difficulty understanding the ways in which I needed to do that. But in general, I find that feedback is really helpful in making the product stronger. And so I try to respond to all the feedback. And if I agree with the feedback, and in most cases I do, I think it makes it stronger, I do the best that I can to respond to it. I think it is okay for you to disagree with it, but you need to provide a rationale for that and to communicate that rationale. So I'm going to pass it now to Susan. Susan, you need to turn your mute off.
Okay, now I'll try. I probably messed it up for us, but here we go. My name is Susan Campbell. I'm Chief Student Affairs Officer Emerita at the University of Southern Maine. I really appreciate Lisa's comments because I knew I liked her, and the fact that she was studied symbolic interactionism just made her all the more respected in my eyes. The article that I wrote, or that I contributed to, it was a co-authored manuscript, was really in response to a call. We had talked with a number of folks about doing an interview with Virginia Gordon, who was arguably one of the mothers, one of the founding people associated with academic advising and NACADA. We wanted to do an interview that would capture views on where academic advising had been, to help have her situate her own research and scholarship within the field, and even do a bit of musing about the future. But our plans obviously changed with her passing. What we then did, a number of folks submitted a proposal to the NACADA Journal Editorial Board that would dedicate an issue to Virginia and her work. So given my interest in it, in capturing Virginia, understanding more about her and just celebrating her life, I responded to the call and did so with a colleague. What we did was construct a series of questions that we compiled into a survey of sorts. We ran the questions that we were asking by the other members of the team working on that particular issue of the journal. And then we sent it out. We sent it out to friends, to colleagues, and others who had worked with Virginia in scholarship, and either at Ohio State or not. So that was our intention, was really to capture, because we couldn't capture it in her words, We wanted to capture Virginia Gordon as experienced by colleagues, scholars, students, and friends. Our goal and the relevance was really to document the contributions to advising in the lives of others that Virginia touched, and her involvement and her engagement with the field and with mentoring others was phenomenal. Originally, we intended our story to be kind of a friendly portrait about the impact of Virginia's lives. We thought, well, we'll just kind of recount the responses, we'll combine them, we'll synthesize them, and we'll tell a nice story, a wonderful story that celebrates the life of Virginia. That didn't quite work out the way we had planned it once the manuscript went to the review. One reviewer, who shall remain nameless, challenged the friendly portrait nature of the manuscript and said we weren't doing the richness of the data justice. What that challenged us to do, and trust me, my colleague and I were not really excited about going back and re-reviewing the data, but that comment really challenged us to step back and think about what we were doing. What had emerged from the interview data really began to develop as Virginia as a servant leader. And that was our focus. We restructured the work as a phenomenological study using servant leadership as a theoretical framework. That suggestion by the reviewer made all the difference in this particular manuscript, and indeed made it incredibly a very, very much stronger article for the journal. So that's that story, and it sounds like everyone comes at things from lots of different areas, and my hunch is that everybody gets ideas all of the time. And what we as journal on the journal in the editorial board, what we want you to do is follow those ideas and begin to construct manuscripts or write articles, write about what you're learning, write about what you know. Our process in the journal is developmental. We intend to provide as much assistance to people who are interested in writing and submitting to the journal, to the review, to other NACADA venues. We are so committed to that process that we're continuing to develop an infrastructure to support the writing of new authors, to provide feedback to those who have published in the past. We have, through the Research Center, we have a writer support set of webinars, and we encourage you to visit the NACADA site under the journal and support for writers. We also, in addition to that support, we want to develop authors. So it is not unusual for anyone to come to us to present an idea, and we'll give quick advice, we'll give some reference to resources that people might want to do. The other way that authors come to us with their ideas is through the submission of a manuscript. When we receive a manuscript, the editorial team spends a great deal of time during doing what we call a desk review. And our goal is to say, is this suitable for the journal? Is it not suitable for the journal? Will it contribute to the literature? And if so, is it written in such a way that either we can help shape it, or is it something that we just can't? So it might be that we reject it and refer it to another NACADA venue, or another venue, as a matter of fact, or we move it on. We move it on to the review process, and that takes us to the publication process. Once a manuscript is accepted, it goes through lots and lots of steps: reference checks, copy editing, redlining, proofing, and then publishing. It is not unusual for a manuscript to go through 2, if not 3, revisions before publication. So that's our story. We're sticking to it. And what I'd like to do is invite the other members of this panel to offer some tips that, that they have, that they would like to share to help support you as someone who is interested in publishing with NACADA. So I'd like to open it up.
I'll start off again. You know, the first couple up there, the reference checks and recency of sources, are two of my pet peeves, I guess. You know, that everything that's cited in the work needs to be cited accurately in the reference list. So when I'm reviewing a manuscript, I read it, I'm trying to get the content, make notes, and check each source to see if they match, or if there's something in the manuscript that's not in the references, I'll call that to the author's attention. And recency of sources. Now, many articles are going to need some sense of history when you're reviewing something to develop and get to your point in the study that that you've done or that you're in the process of doing. But to cite sources in 20 years ago that really are not quite as relevant to the current research is something that I'll look at. I think actually NACADA has kind of a timeline for major publications that sources have to be within 5, 6, 8 years, something like that. So something to pay attention to. And certainly the overall APA, but I'm going to defer to the other editors who pay much more direct attention to that and some of the other things. And I'll maybe make some other comments later, but I want to give the others an opportunity.
I'll go ahead and add. So generally, we like our authors to submit everything in APA 7th edition, and I know it takes some time to get used to the changes with the new APA manual. There are some resources provided by the NACADA Center for Research, as well as the APA style blog. But I would say give it a good try to be close, and you will get feedback to help you as well. The next point on there, be specific about your purpose and direction early. This is just something to state the purpose of your manuscript, whether it's a study or a conceptual paper, somewhere in the beginning, first few paragraphs, just to show the readers kind of where you're going with it, what they expect as they go throughout the manuscript.
Craig?
Sure. I'd like to speak briefly about methodology, particularly in the qualitative papers that I review. The description of the methods of data collection and analysis do not go nearly deep enough. And one good litmus test about this is that I, as a reader, not knowing who you are and have no idea of what your study was about until I get your paper, I should be able to replicate the study on my own just by reading your methods section. And that's really important because it gives the reader confidence in your findings if they know exactly how you went about doing this. So that's my little pet peeve, as Tom said.
I don't have a real pet peeve. I do think that, as we described earlier, the developmental process that we go through with the journal with manuscripts, I hope it's understood that what we really try to do is provide feedback that will help improve any manuscript that's being submitted. So my advice to you is to really be open to that constructive feedback and not to take any of those comments as a slight to your competence or a slight to the work that you have submitted. It's always done from an educative standpoint in which we want you to continue to improve. There's another slide in this deck that you don't see, but you will, because you will have a copy of this. And it's a listing of some resources that will help you understand more about academic writing. And we hope that you will take the time to look at that, to check out those resources. And we also hope that you will take the time to think about ideas, take the time to connect with any of us. If you'd like some feedback and want to understand more about whether or not the idea that you have is something that ought to be pursued and through what venue at NACADA, we're always here to provide that kind of help. With that,
Susan, if I could, I would like to add just one more comment to the hints and tips there. If you go back to that slide,
happy to.
the two bullets there in the middle, two of them there sort of in the middle, the being open to constructive feedback, which has been mentioned, and communicating what we mean. And that's one of the, I think, the hardest lessons and best lesson that I learned through my years of writing and publishing and getting feedback and so forth, that I distinctly remember reading feedback that I got on a manuscript submission. And I read the comment from the reviewer, and I said to myself, well, this person doesn't know what I'm talking about. And then I had to stop and think, wait a minute, I'm the communicator. It's up to me to communicate what I mean. And it changed my whole outlook on paying very close attention to reviews and not being upset by them, but take them as the bullet point says, constructive feedback. And that's certainly what has helped me in the writing. Certainly you can get that from your colleagues and you know, other people too, even before you submit it for a manuscript. That's another just piece of advice that I would add. Sorry we didn't put that on the slide, but
Okay.
anyway.
I would just add that humility is so important, and the automatic reaction is defense, but I think it's really good to humble yourself. I had a moment that Tom's describing just a couple weeks ago where I reviewed something that I'd written a couple months ago, and I thought, what the heck did I mean when I wrote this? So it's good to be open to that, and sometimes you're just too close to the material and you need somebody else to have kind of an independent eye on it.
Yeah. Lisa, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think along those lines, when you get feedback, I would review it and then take 24 hours and just take a step back from it, because sometimes it does feel personal because you work so hard, and just cool it. And then when you revisit it, look at it with a different lens and just realize that this again is there. Someone spent a lot of time reviewing your work and providing you content to help you make it better, and they want to see it published or they want to see it go somewhere. And so that's, in the end, they have your best interest, even if they're providing you feedback that sounds maybe not so pleasant to you. So I would give yourself that day off after you get it back, and then get to work when you're ready, and that will help a lot.
And just to reiterate, we look upon this as a developmental, constructive, helpful process. So don't be afraid of writing and submitting. Just follow our guidelines, our advice as best you can, and take that feedback. Thank you.
Okay. Here's the link. Here is the slide with the links to the resources. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their insights. We hope that what we have shared is helpful to you and that you will consider writing for the journal. In addition, apparently we need your feedback. We want your feedback about this presentation, and just so that we can make improvements and help the conference planners in terms of the future. For that, we thank you.